May I now request Commodore Srikant Kesnur, Director, Maritime Warfare Center, Mumbai, who has overseen the coordination of today's event, to sum up the day's proceedings. Commodore Kesnur, you have the most complex job on hand. The session from morning to evening has been full of surprises, lots of issues raised, and ideas and concepts, both old and new, have emerged. It is going to be a massive undertaking, but I'm looking forward to hear you bring us the key points of the productive sessions and, of course, your valuable inputs as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's been a long, wonderful, fascinating session. There have been lots of interesting discussions and deliberations, and it is extremely difficult to sort of sum all of this, to cull all of this, because very wonderful points have been made. And I do not have the kind of photographic memory that the follow-on speaker, Admiral Chauhan, has. So I will be referring to my notes as we go along and what I jotted. But today is important, or this time is important for several reasons. We are celebrating 50 years of 1971 war, Swarnim Vijay Varsh, in which the Indian Navy played a big role, and that led arguably to some sort of maritime reawakening in the country. We also entered 75th year of our independence, and the maritime domain figures as a big part of this growth over 75 years. Today, closer home is the 24th anniversary, quarter century of INSV, Indian Naval Sailing Vessel Tarangini, which has played a big part in Navy's soft power efforts. Talking of the military issues, yesterday was Remembrance Day, 11th November, where we commemorate and we remember all those from India who took part in World War I and World War II. There were discussions on memorials in the second session, and it brings to relief into sharp relief some of what they spoke regarding Remembrance Day and whether this figures in our memory. So there is both a military aspects and a maritime component, and we must remember that merchant marine played a big role in World War I and World War II, so they are a part of this story. Having sort of considered all of these issues, I think we set the stage in many ways for the discussions that happened. In the first session, we had three outstanding talks. We began with Captain Anand Dixit, who brought out very quickly how this topic has been enhanced in its scope over the last few years, the Maritime Seminar, and how when we talk of maritime soft power, we are referring to maritime culture of a country. And though it is a new phrase, he said it has differing interpretations, but it has significance beyond those interpretations. And he mentioned of maritime art and how IMF, which he is heading, has given lots of importance to maritime art through the SEMA. And later, if you'll remember, we had two artists from SEMA. So after his sort of quick talk, we had Captain Behel, who talked again of the difficulties of recognizing between hard power and soft power. But interestingly, he brought out that several components of soft power, and he brought out two or three issues. He said medical and piracy assistance. Now, piracy assistance is an interesting example because when you talk of piracy assistance, it could combine several elements. There is a hard power assistance when you thwart piracy attempt or when you chase away pirates. But there's also possibly soft power assistance if you were to give medical assistance, if you were to do counter-piracy patrols, or if you were to form a part of a global coalition against piracy, or if you were in the exercise of doing counter-piracy, do other collaborative ventures with other people. Captain Behel also brought out about UK maritime industry and how the fact that it still is the global hub, and so long as we continue to read publications from UK or any other country for referring to the pilot or for their various books of navigation, then they will continue to be thought leaders. Therefore, he said, write and publish, whether it is history, memoirs, or books of navigation or books of operations, do write and publish. I think that was a big cry from him to everyone in the marine community, naval and merchant, to write more. The CNC, in his keynote address, he talked of very many things. It was a very large canvas. He talked interestingly of even though land is occupied largely where man stays. He talked of floating cities. He talked of underwater cities, and who knows where the future might go. The important point he made is that when the Navy talks of soft power, it is much more than mere strategic considerations. It is largely with a view to have sort of collaborative partnerships to generate win-win solutions. He said we need to do a lot more, however, to harness. Uh, he referred to a phrase called the maritime ecosystem, which requires the best brains. And I think this came later on when we talked about the maritime education and other things, that how do you encourage, how do you get the best brains, how do you become a magnet for attracting some of the finest minds in the country to the maritime industry, to the maritime sector. He also talked of the container crisis and the use of smart power as a combination of hard power and soft power. He brought out an interesting thing, that ironically, even as the sea continues to become more and more important in affairs human contact itself with the sea has dwindled. And therefore, as we have more and more of unmanned, as we have more and more of automatic vehicles, as we more and more get the feeling that the milk or the fuel is delivered from the petrol pump or the milkman, or from the local boy who delivers, and not from their places of origin, then the sea itself may not become attractive to people. I think that's a big challenge that people like us have to face. How do we make sea and life at sea more attractive? He talked of use of technology, particularly for pole vaulting rather than leapfrogging. And therefore, here is a question that all of us must consider: whether can we use technology, apps, for example, on phones? Can they have maritime games? How can simulators, can we have ship handling simulators in airports and other places, or smaller sort of simulators at various museums, to bring in technology in a big way and make it attractive to younger generation? I think this is what we need to consider. After that, we began our first session. Our first session had some wonderful speakers, people who are in the vanguard of maritime education. Dr. Malini Shankar brought out how, and I think that's an important point she made, that our seafarers are very good, regarded professionally very highly, but we need soft skills, and that's very important. And she talked of communication, attitude, leadership, and analysis. She also focused a great deal on R&D, and I think that's again another very, very important point that is being made. You know, unless we put in money into R&D, we are not really going to become leaders. We are not going to get cutting edge. Dr. Shanta Kumar, who followed, he talked about how knowledge, in fact, it was a sort of perfect follow-on from Dr. Malini. He says how knowledge will always have a market, and even as there is outsourcing of business, there could be several sectors in the maritime field which has a huge demand, particularly in the white collar job and other sectors. Whether the autonomous will reduce, I think Captain Ganender asked an interesting question, whether, as is commonly perceived, will autonomous vehicles and other autonomous entities and automatic sort of vehicles, will it reduce employability, or will it seek to re-engineer people in different ways and continue to keep people engaged and employed? I think that's an important point. Professor Anuradha talked about how the Mumbai University has taken this initiative, recognizing that if you have 8 or 9 districts in which 2 are on the coast, you do need a center dedicated to maritime studies. She also talked of the doctoral program starting in CMAS very well. That's very soon, and I think that's very good news for all of us. Seafaring, there was an increase mentioned to 10%, and we looking at 15% by 2030. That would make us very important players globally. However, the reduction of tonnage in DWT was also brought out by Dr. Malini. Now, one of the important points that was made, I think, by Captain Ganender was the size of delegations in IMO meetings, that how different countries come with big delegations with multiple expertise. And that's exactly what happened when I was in Nairobi and I used to attend piracy conferences. I saw that while we had to make do with the people who were there, yes, we were thinking on the literally on the move, just 2 or 3 people in several conferences. Countries like US, several Western countries, even China would have 10, 15 people who are domain experts in everything from language to maritime law to shipping. So the amount of brains that they could put into these delegations was much more. I think that's an important point again, and therefore IMU's involvement with RIS certainly is a good step. I think all think tanks and universities should have much greater sort of exchanges, as CMAS is having with the Indian Navy. The point was made about need for clear strategy. I think what Dr. Madini mentioned again, a sort of grand maritime vision or a strategy wherein all maritime stakeholders need to think about how do we go and what is it that we want to say. Commodore Gurumani nicely brought out how hydrography is in some ways. He says without hydrography, you can't have safe navigation, you can't have coast, you can't have coastal cities. So Saraswati Vidya hydrography is, and the fact that the Indian Navy is established lead and is one of the best in the world in hydrography, I think should give us much cause to be proud. And also the fact that we teach hydrography to several countries. I think 33 or 34 countries have been represented in the National Institute of Hydrography. Compliance with NEP, leverage with existing collaborations. Many of these things were brought out by all the speakers. And one of the interesting things that I found was greater percentage of women or female students, and I think that's very, very good, because it talks of the maritime sector in future having women. We've seen already women starting to make breakthrough in the Navy and in the merchant marine, or rise to become captains of ships. Last year, in fact, we had a captain of a merchant ship as one of our panelists. As we have women in several maritime sectors, I think that apart from making a more diverse and more equitable society, it will also be excellent for maritime sector. Several other ideas were mooted. How do we educate? The challenge was, does it come through formal education processes or through maritime clubs, scouts, NCC? Sea Cadet Corps was a wonderful option, though it's at the moment just based in a few places. Whether that can be a great model. Again, what came out is that this sort of activities can't be, as Dr. Validi said, it can't be an overnight activity. Future presence building has to be thought of from the present, and we have to see how to go about doing it. Popular culture, which came about both in sessions 2 and session 3, was also reflected here. How do students take to maritime studies? Someone said ferry Alibag to Mumbai, and again, what is the thing that fascinates us? The fireman. So can we have comic heroes? Can we have it was brought out again? I'm sort of jumping sessions. Sinbad the sailor, or even sailor. So should we be having certain equivalent ways in which we can bring the romance in maritime sector? I think that's an important point made. Can we introduce sailing in schools? I think Guru Mani said an excellent thing. Instead of burdening children, let's unburden them. Let's make them more involved, interested through a whole lot of these issues. Of course, again, the caveat came that this should not be a check or tick the box sort of initiatives, but should be more grassroots. Therefore, you have to make children much more educated about this. So don't make education a checkbox item, was what Dr. Shankar said. So how do we have ease of doing business and maritime education? And I think all three spoke about it, though I'm quoting Dr. Malini. I think all three speakers, indeed all four, including Captain Commodore Gurumani, brought out a few issues in this. One is there must be ease of doing business. Second is there must be greater interface between professionals and educational institutions, between think tanks, and private public collaboration should be there. And I couldn't, of course, help wonder at the irony that when I was told or I heard that it is very difficult to get admission in maritime universities in India from abroad, while we have whole lot of people who are trying to study in India, so difficult for us to get foreigners to come and study in India. I think we need to give it much more thought, and I think that's one of the key takeaways of session one. Now, session two, ladies and gentlemen, memorials, and I think Commodore Chitnis began very well when he called maritime museums the Cinderella amongst museums, and he said they are hardly there. Of course, he mentioned some numbers, but the fact that they don't register in our consciousness should be telling the story. Now, Commander Mohan Narayan, who has a rich experience dealing both with maritime history and maritime museums, talked of the difference. He said history may be didactic, but museums must create experiences. And of course, how they can be was taken up by Batul in her excellent presentation on the Lothal Maritime Heritage Complex, where she spoke about the tourism potential of museums and the multiplier effect. And she made an interesting point that this itself can create a global community of soft interactions, which is online, Instagram, meaningful exchange. So she sought to de-link this community from the formal sort of communities or interactions that governments can have. And she mentioned, or she hinted at how if you can get tourism, you can get maritime heritage, then you create a global set of people who want to go and see and visit, and that creates a sort of virtuous circle. I understand, I'm not sure, but 2 years ago when electricity was given, 24-hour electricity was given at the Gharapuri or the Elephanta Island, the tourism profile there has changed completely. So that in a way could probably be the answer for future, to tap into tourism potential of museums. And that takes us to what Bharat said. And I think again he said wonderful thing where he says gray hair overpower the black. That is, how do you, the biggest challenge is how do you rope in the young. And he talked about Bollywood, of Hindi having been made popular through Bollywood rather than through the Rashtra Bhasha Prachar Samitis. And he made an interesting point later that he said that it is the 15 to 25 young adults that's the most difficult audience. And I think this is important, ladies and gentlemen, because both the Navy and the Merchant Marine seek their future sort of leaders and people from this 15 to 25 target group. So it makes you wonder if we are missing out something. Should we be speaking to marketing people and to brand strategists and others to see how we can sort of make the maritime domain, the maritime discipline attractive, so that we can get the finest minds. He also talked of making heritage cool and museums experiential. And I think one of the things that came out, and when I spoke recently at a school, and they were bemoaning that last year they could not do their planned trip to Esselworth, the museum amusement park. And I sort of sought to ask them, I said, you are a school in Kolaba. Why do you want to go all the way there? Why don't you experience by going to the fishermen community just opposite Badwar Park and see if you can take a day at sea with them? Why don't you go and seek experiences in different ways? So that these are some ways in which I think we seem to miss the very obvious tricks that we have. While we would talk about Narli Purnima on our mobile apps and show pictures of that, if we were to actually see how the fishermen celebrate Narli Purnima, that would make us much more educated about the rites and rituals that obtain among seafaring communities. So lots of things that came out here: walk, sailing tour, enactment, light and sound shows, DAOs. And I think it's very, very important when they talked about DAOs, because this was mentioned later by Dr. Rukhsana also, the DAOs of Mandvi and sailing. And I have seen this in Mombasa. Some of the great tourism advertisements is through restaurants and hotels and DAOs. And it is sad if India doesn't really sort of advertise DAOs. because Indians went all over the Indian Ocean region in dhows. In fact, one of the more famous books in East Africa talking of Indians coming is called They Came on Dhows, written by Blanche D'Souza. Therefore, for India now, not to sort of front dhows or those experiences or the shipbuilding experiences, whether in Kerala or in Mandvi, I think we are missing out a trick or two, not just from maritime consciousness and awareness, but even from maritime tourism aspects. And I hope the Lothal committee takes sort of a note of that. Mm. So point was made about roping in influencers and people like that. So digital marketing is the name of the game. So how do we do that? I think again, Dr. Nathji said very few decide to work at sea or on sea, and our history has been continental. Of course, that is made. But she made an interesting point. She said we don't have ownership of oceans. That is simply not there. That's a point that was made later by Commodore Prakash also in his moderation, that we tend to see the coast as a sort of a barrier or a border rather than vital territorial area or important spaces. I think one of the questions was by Sitaram, who talked of water sport complexes with museums. I think that is a very important aspect. Dr. Nanji said mix ethnography with archaeology, so that romance of folklores and seas have to be stitched together, and it is only then that you can make it interesting. I think that's an important point made. And there were, of course, lots of questions on Bombay castles, plans for Bombay, dockyard walk, and I think Commander Narayan came into all of these with lots of gusto. I think the point is well made, ladies and gentlemen, but the security concerns are there. We can't walk away from them. The Navy has maintained these places very beautifully. We have to see and take a call on some of these, and I'm sure you will appreciate those issues. Coastal cleanup being extended to rivers, very, very interesting point made by Commodore Chitnis. How do we get brand strategists, marketers, and influencers to incentivize? We have to consider pop culture through movies, I think, and our organization that came from all of this was don't make heritage and maritime issues elitist, take them to the masses. Issues. Memorials were discussed, and I have spoken about them. How we don't seem to know enough about memorials in terms of not recognizing their value. A mention was made of Gallipoli by Bharat, and I think he's right. The fact that Turkey and Australia and New Zealand, it's very, very important to them. Indians don't recognize. So many Indians were a part of the Gallipoli campaign. For many years, I used to write about, though I'm a Navy man, I used to write about the Gallipoli and talk about it because I was similarly moved by the Anzac Day ceremonies that Australia used to hold in Nairobi. And I thought that we have not recognized Indian contribution in this enough. So is there a case for us to visit these spaces abroad and for people abroad to visit memorials in India and to visit places with maritime significance? I guess certainly there is. Kanderi Island as a great tourist destination was brought about. So I think the common thing that came out was lesser elitism, more access to sea, make it more popular, consider taking in expertise from people who understand young people, who understand the pulse of young people. So sometimes maritime people in maritime disciplines stay in their silos and ivory towers. And if we want to reach out, I think we need some more expert advice. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope because of the technical sort of faults, you will indulge me for about 10 minutes more. You will notice that we have some more time before I call on our next speaker, Admiral Chauhan. So I wanted to talk more about session 3 and session 4. Session 3 was very, very interesting because it had young people, and this was the first time that we were seeking to rope in young people, and I think it was fantastic. And it was noticeable in the way that this session, though we had planned it in the afternoon at lunchtime, actually had the highest viewership. I think when Advait talks of Tommy, straight away you realize how role models are important for people to take to some profession, to be interested in. Tia and Swati brought in what motivation and determination means, and when motivation and determination meets interest, then you can really scale great heights. I was quite interested and taken up how Pratik spoke about certain fascination for pirate in his drawing, and Deepshika about how she said, "I simply love fish," and I think these little things that keep you interested, visual motifs or something in your imagination from the maritime world, tell a lot of stories. Uh, Advait made another interesting mention again. He said, "I use my boat as a Maruti," and we got to ask this. I think this question came up last year also. We have seen in places like Seychelles and Mauritius that people bring in boats in a marina park, go. Ordinary people own them. I mean, when I say ordinary, I mean reasonably middle class people own boats and take the boats out for a spin, as we do with our cars when we go out to drive. So I think, can we create that sort of culture, or it still remains elitist? I think we have to consider that. But I like the way he said, "I enjoyed every moment in water and I learned to care for my boat." I think that's a very, very important point. As we are told in the armed forces, you care for your weapon and the weapon will care for you. So when he says that I care for my boat, he brought out one of the key factors in terms of understanding and ownership. Tia brought out encouragement of like-minded people, guidance. Swati said, "Learn to fall." I think it's important when she talked about her sailing experience, and this Advait also brought out, you must learn to fall. You must learn to get into the drink, so to say. Have the sea water in your veins. Taste the sea water, and don't bother about those little injuries and bruises. They will happen, but you will remember them and they will be memorable. Advait also said, "Don't feel bad to lose. You will succeed at some stage." And the pride of national flag, the pride of representing your nation, there can be nothing better than that. And camaraderie and friendship. I think these were again common themes against these young people, and I'm really taken up with the maturity that these young people showed in their discussion. They talked of overcoming your fears, whether it was insects or thalassophobia or love for nature. Swati, the way she's handled motherhood, PG, COVID issues, along with her other passion, self-discipline, mental strength, all of these are there to develop personality. So it's not over till the last race is over. Your passion is not a distraction, but a part of you. And how can I not fall in love with the sea, as Pratik said? Or as Deepshika said, once you start, you gain momentum. So what all these people brought out is that it is a fun thing to do and fun thing to be. Admiral Nadkarni in the fourth session started off. We got Commodore G. Prakash. He's slightly, due to some technical difficulties, a couple of minutes late, but we flagged off that session. Commodore G. Prakash, very erudite scholar, he got into the gear straight away. And I think one of the important things that Admiral Nadkarni talked of was sports, again taking off from previous session, and he said how it's a good point that sailors did well. I think we make too much about certain sports getting more attention. That is true. Will sailing not get attention? I don't think so. As you create word beaters, I mean, sports like shooting is not necessarily very great or pleasing to the eye. You don't get running commentary. But there were lots of Indians hooked on to shooting during the Olympics, as indeed they were hooked on to golf, wanting to see Aditi Ashok win a medal. So I'm sure in future, when our sailors become medal prospects, sailing will also become a much sought after TV viewership sport. But I think that point is well made, and that was carried forward by Richa, who said Navy has lots of stories to tell and it must stay on top of the narrative. She talked of MVC winner, she talked of, however, that storytelling has a deadline, it has timeline issues, that people's attention span is limited, and so we must know when to tell the story. Again, this is a matter of expertise. Kulpreet Yadav talked of taking action. He defined maritimity as moving from awareness to action. Vishnu ruled the loss of Virat. I must also mention, I think Vishnu covered the expedition that went from 50 meters below sea to the Everest from the submarine, which flagged off. He was on the submarine there. So that was the Everest expedition, which technically climbed, as we said, about 8,900 meters or something like that. So Vishnu was part of that expedition too, and his concern about Virat is well hoisted. Then we talked of lots of literature. I think Admiral Nadkarni listed out everything. India has been slow in the maritime literature genre, only as far as military fiction is concerned. Of course, Sandeep Punithan's Operation X is not only a great book, I think a great movie can come out of that. And as was seen from Ken Mutiny, a good book can result in good theatre, good cinema, and much more. And so possibly Operation X can be that. I think when it comes to other realms of literature, we have done some outstanding cutting edge work, global level work. I mean, Amitav Ghosh's books, in a sense, can be talked of as maritime literature. But if we want specifically fiction, thrillers, I think there's lots more that can be done there. Again, encouraging water sports was brought about by Navy. And I think a whole lot of very understandable angst in this section dealt with the Navy being a silent service. Though, of course, Vishnu acknowledged that we had the best PROs and who were always on top of the game. I think there was largely a consensus that it is far interesting and attractive to tell stories of a man in a valley, a trigger, and a gun. And it's not so. I think the sophistication of the Navy goes against it, as Vishnu alluded to it, that is it sexy enough to talk of stories of integration on Vishakhapatnam class? And I think that's a point very well made. Our sophistication possibly goes against us. People want more sort of thrilling stories. And it may not be easy, as Commodore G. Prakash said, that not all stories have to involve thrill and blood and gore. There are lots of human interest stories. And I think that's a point well made. But I think it's also important to underscore that the Navy is called silent service for a reason. We operate beyond the gaze, beyond the horizon of the common person. And therefore, it's always difficult to bring out our stories. That is the nature of the medium. That's the nature of the beast. The role of think tanks, the difficulties and problems that they face was brought out by Admiral Nadkarni again. And I think one of the issues that think tanks need to ask is, do we preach to the converted, or are we sort of getting more bang for the buck? And one of the tests is, are we having new members? Are we having new audience? Are we getting more footfalls? Are we getting more eyeballs for our seminars and webinars? I think that in some ways could be some of the tests to see if our messages are going across. And while we must influence policy and a whole lot of things, we must also reach out to greater section of our countrymen to enhance maritime consciousness, maritime knowledge. So I think the points that were made again dealt with excess. It were dealt with by Kulpreet again. It was dealt with a thrill factor, but it needs to be underscored, ladies and gentlemen, that sometimes such a lot of burden is placed, so to say, at the Navy's door, that we must do think tank activities, that we must encourage heritage walks, that we must enable maritime cinema and documentaries, that people forget that the core job of the Navy is fighting and to go and sock it to the enemy when required. And we must not forget that. A whole lot of these things are done by the Navy. Navy is doing the heavy lifting through organizations like NMF, MHS, through our outreach during Navy weeks, through seminars like this. The Navy is doing heavy lifting in a whole lot of maritime domain activities. And now institutions, think tanks, other sort of actors and stakeholders in the maritime realm need to come to the party, so to say, and sort of make it more of a combined effort. Ladies and gentlemen, just give me last couple of minutes. Certain overall points I thought as a summator, but adding a bit of my own. Some of the things that could be considered, one of the points that was brought out has been, is there time? Like the military literature festivals that have been going on in Chandigarh and more recently in Lucknow, is there time now to have a maritime literature festival where we can discuss many of these things and get to maritime books and periodicals and people who sell, buy? Is there time for doing this and sort of bring maritime thought issues under one umbrella? And if so, who would take the lead in it? Again, one of the other points that comes is that to be a leader, you need to start taking initiatives. And to start taking initiatives, you need to start generating your own thoughts, your own literature. We have done that, as I pointed out, in literature that's outside the military maritime realm, cinema in many ways. Bollywood and cricket are great examples of a soft power. Our non-maritime education also attracts a huge amount of people from various parts of the world. And the Navy itself is a great example of a hard power that wields lots of soft power in the way we are attractive to foreign countries and others for a range of activities. The recent Solar Alliance, for example, wherein the USA has joined as 101st member, is a classic example of what happens when you take initiative and take the lead. So I think one of the things that we could do in the maritime sector is to start being imbued with that sense of destiny about taking a leadership role. So, how do we ensure exposure to see through to a whole lot of landlocked people? I think that's the big challenge. Can we have ship replicas? Do we use technology? How do we make people more aware of the sea? I think this is a question that keeps coming time and again. Semester at sea was talked about, adopting a ship was talked about, museum as experiential issues was talked about. But I think one of the biggest challenges for maritime people, just as we tell people on land to look at seas and to look at the seas as vital areas, I think those of us in the maritime domain need to look at hinterland and see how we can take our brethren along and educate them about maritime issues. Can maritime history and culture be at least an elective subject in IMU, JMU, and a whole lot of maritime institutions? Lots of maritime institutions focus on maritime security, maritime law, again, the sort of harder subjects. And while that's completely understandable, what gives them a sense of pride and identity is our maritime history and culture. And there are reasons for us to be hugely proud about. Can it be elective? How can we spread that? I think that is a point that's made. Soft skills, above all, I think soft skill is something that we need to consider. How do we build soft skills? Because soft power requires soft skills. And those of us who are in the business, we are not going to get different wielders of soft power. Some of them may be there through tourism, through museums, but many times soft power may have to be inherent in our own activity. So all of us in the maritime domain and maritime profession need to see how we can get a lot more soft skilling and reskilling if required. And soft skills is not merely about good manners and speaking well. It's about language skills. It's about knowledge of law. It's about multilateralism, as we people in the Navy talk about. It's about comfort with diverse cultures and peoples. And I think that is what soft skills are all about. And that's something that we could give a thought to. With those thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to compliment all our speakers and moderators for giving us an excellent overview. It was a fascinating debate, fantastic seminar. We had lots of wonderful discussions. Allow me now, give me 2 or 3 minutes to introduce our next speaker, Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, who's going to deliver the valedictory address. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if I were to describe Admiral Chauhan in just one phrase or half a sentence, I would say he's been there, done that. There is not anything that you can say that he has not done. And we, of course, look up to him as an exemplar, as a role model. But in case there are some of you who are not aware of his very distinguished career and service, let me just go over the brief highlights. Admiral Chauhan had nearly 40 years of distinguished service. He retired in 2013. He's a ex-NDA navigation direction specialist. In his early years, he was deputed to the Mauritian Coast Guard. He helped set up the Mauritian Coast Guard there. He's had 4 command tenures, including a missile corvette, a guided missile frigate, INS Brahmaputra, as the commissioning commanding officer, and then as the commanding officer of the aircraft carrier INS Virat. He's attended all important courses. He has been the principal director of naval operations. He was also in charge of our think tank organization, MWCN Intech, for some time. And in each of these initiatives, you can bet that he gave a huge push to everything that happened in the field of cogitation and thinking. It was always a challenge staying in pace with him, and it was always a delight listening to him. As the flag officer, Admiral Chauhan was our first Assistant Chief of Naval Staff in charge of foreign cooperation and intelligence. And that is when the Navy was going through certain reorganization in which FC, or foreign cooperation, got huge impetus, a whole lot of it owing to his untiring efforts, including pioneering the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium initiative. And over a period of time, you can see how these initiatives have led from there. IONS, IFR, Goa Maritime Conclave, the sailing regattas, the international sailing regattas that we have. And I think he put the grain of expanded foreign cooperation and what the navies can do and the possibilities there in that job that he did for quite a few years. In the 3-star rank, he was first the Chief of Staff, Western Naval Command, and then he went on to head the Indian Naval Academy, INA, which has over the years again become a great center for excellence. In its short, relatively short span over the last few years, it's become one of our most reputed institutions. Again, I think owing a lot to efforts put in by people like Admiral Chauhan. After his retirement, he's been very, very active, talking, thinking, part of several track 2 dialogues. He's an advisor for the Ministry of External Affairs, National Security Council, a whole lot of other think tanks. He's a regular at all our military colleges and others. He's associated with the Aspen Center, and he has written about 85 published articles. That again is simply the tip of iceberg, ladies and gentlemen. I think you can ask anyone in the Navy to name our most articulate spokesman, our best ambassador, and one of the finest maritime minds, and they will say Admiral Pradeep Chauhan. Bilu sir, over to you for the valedictory address.
Thank you very much. I hope that I'm not echoing all over the countryside. First of all, let me explain to our viewers that one of the reasons why Srikant has been quite so generous with his comments to me is because I owe him money. And, he's always in the hope that I might well return it one of these days. But let me be more serious. Let me say thank you to start with. And, when one gets called to deliver a valedictory address, one thinks that perhaps it's because one has not only been there and done that, as he so kindly said, but perhaps one is pretty much done. Flag officers, general officers, air officers, commanding officers, excellencies, ladies, gentlemen, Captain Dixit, President of the Indian Maritime Foundation, Captain Kapil Dev Behel, Master Mariner and Chairman of the Nautical Institute of India, Commodore Kesnur, representing with such competence the Western Naval Command in particular and the Indian Navy and in general, and our very distinguished and extraordinarily impressive members of the various panels that have sat in session today, plus the very, very erudite members of the audience virtually attending today's webinar. Good afternoon. Let me begin with a somewhat unequivocal statement. We are now into the first 2 decades of what will be at least 2 full centuries of the sea. Hence, I would like to put it to you that over these, not after, over these 200 years, India will be a maritime power, or India will not be any kind of power at all. Does that mean military maritime power? Naval power? No, of course not. As has been repeatedly mentioned today, naval power is, after all, a subset of maritime power. Power itself, as Ms. Meera Bhadre so correctly mentioned just a little while ago, the very concept of power remains a contested one. And she was absolutely right in saying that power per se is certainly not a zero-sum game involving two categories, one winners and one losers. It is entirely possible, particularly in the maritime domain, to have all winners. That is the underpinning rationale of the prime ministerial concept, maritime concept of India, encapsulated in the acronym SAGAR. It is security and growth for all in the region. It is really important for us to understand that India believes firmly that all boats rise with the rising tide, and that the Indian economy cannot, in some magical fashion, ride on some wonderful crest while the economies of our neighborhood are wallowing in some dismal trough. Either we all rise or none of us rise. So yet, when we talk about all this stuff, about this maritimity with which we ended today's session and the maritimity with which we began today's sessions, and if we put it to the test, then what might we find? Well, let me ask you a simple question. In your mind, since I cannot hear you, in your minds, I would like you to complete this sentence and see how many of you managed to get it right. You can cheat because I can't check. Nor is it necessary to do so. Here's the sentence, and it says, Khoob ladi mardani wo to, and the answer will have come, wo to Jhansi wali Rani thi. Now, let's take another one. Khoob ladi mardani Rani Abba ka chokta. And the guys are saying, Abba ka chauta? Same to you. And so, we have a problem in our folklore. We have a problem in our ability to actually provide consciousness to the maritime segments of our struggles over the centuries. Every country struggles. So how many of us actually are comfortable with Rani Abbaka Chauta of the 16th century? She fought the Portuguese for 40 years. Suppose she had been a football team, and suppose Jhansi Ki Rani had been a football team. Then Jhansi Ki Rani would have had played 1-0, drawn 0, lost 1. Rani Abbaka would have played 40 years continuously, won 17 times against the Portuguese Navy, the Portuguese Army, the Portuguese Irregulars, the Portuguese Amphibious Forces, drawn 0, lost 1 in the last, and that too by backstabbing. What about Rani Kittur Chennamma? Fought the British in 1824 against the doctrine of lapse. What about Rani Khelad Chennamma? Repelled the Mughal army led by Aurangzeb from her military base in Karnataka. What I'm trying to get at is, when we study history, ladies and gentlemen, we study the history of Delhi, and we think that we are studying the history of India. This is a huge problem. And this is where the problem actually begins. So consequently, it is entirely appropriate that nurturing a maritime culture has been the most striking leitmotif of this entire webinar. Me, I am suffused by a special sense of belonging this evening, this afternoon, and was so this morning as well. As Chief of Staff of the Western Naval Command, I had a series of very rewarding interactions with the then President and now President Emeritus of the Indian Maritime Foundation, Commodore Rajan Veer. And that resulted in the launch of this annual engagement, whose current edition we have just enjoyed all day today. Moreover, as the Director General of the National Maritime Foundation, which is the strategic knowledge partner of the Indian Navy and a peer partner of the Indian Maritime Foundation, I am deeply invested and interested in every endeavor that seeks to further the development of maritime India. I am completely sold on this. So, the National Maritime Foundation, I am very proud to say, is the foremost resource center for the development of strategies for the promotion and the protection of the maritime interests of India. What is the maritime interest of India? It is simply stated at the prime ministerial level in 2008. It is freedom, freedom from threats arising in the sea or from the sea or through the sea. These threats could be man-made, geopolitical constriction, state-on-state conflict. They could be natural, tsunamis, earthquakes, seaquakes, cyclones. They could be combinations of both. Climate change, ocean acidification, the challenges of biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, the challenges of areas beyond national jurisdiction. All of these constitute challenges. When we have freedom from them, we are secure. So, the point I wanted to therefore underscore for you is that our effort to make this particular freedom a reality cannot be done by having only a small number of needles of excellence. It is true that a small number of needles of excellence can indeed support a large mass, but it is true also that that mass will never be stable. So for it to become stable, we have to increase these needles until they are no longer seen as needles, but constitute the foundation of this mass as a whole. And I would therefore particularly like to express my admiration for the choice of the themes that have been explored in the 4 technical sessions that have constituted this particular webinar. Now, I know that Ms. Krishna Kataria has already succinctly summarized the main takeaways of each session, and then Commodore Kesnur has, with his characteristic candor and charm, summated the entire day. And I have no intention of trying to compete with the excellence of either of these presentations, nor giving you or subjecting you to some second-rate kind of repetition. However, I must state quite unequivocally that I was delighted to see that the webinar began by squarely addressing the foundational weakness of our country, education. Let me give you an example of what the challenge actually is. Unlike any other scholastic or academic subject, take general science, take science. Not all of you are scientists, not all of you are physicists, not all of you are chemists, but everyone has done some form of general science, increasing incrementally over school. What about English or Hindi or Sanskrit or Tamil or Malayalam? Everyone has studied this incrementally. First from home, then with your friends, then in school, then parents, then teachers, then parents again. What about subjects like geography, history, mathematics? Mathematics, everyone has done arithmetic. Everyone, if I said, what is 3 plus 4? It's easy, it's 7. Because you have learned it incrementally, it has been repeated, you have been tested, you have been re-examined, you have been... What about maritime subjects? Duk. Zero. Not one subject in not 1 year of your entire schooling. There was a lament made on by, I think it was by Malini, when she said that, these are tick marks of check boxes when we talk about environmental studies. It's true. But there are tick marks in some check boxes. In the maritime domain, there are no check boxes because the teachers don't know, they can't teach. The students have no idea whether they want to know or not because it lies outside their scope. Therefore, how is all this to be tackled? It's all very well to say that, yeah, we have this problem, yeah, we have that problem, and misery certainly loves company. So perhaps we'll all remain friends forever. But how is this to be tackled? This particular session that we witnessed focused upon tertiary and professional education. In this regard, I must say that the National Maritime Foundation has been working closely with the Gujarat Maritime University and the GNLU, and the efforts of Professor Dr. Shanta Kumar deserve particular praise and continued support. Dr. Malini Shankar is, as always, delightful to listen to. And she and her and the Indian Maritime University, which she heads with such distinction, are certainly going to be the next port of call for the outreach efforts of the National Maritime Foundation. And I'm very taken, of course, by the Center of Excellence in Maritime Studies, or CMAS, that the University of Mumbai has recently launched, and Dr. Anuradha Majumdar is now leading. But what about schools? What about undergrad studies? What about the kids who didn't manage to go to school? This is where the centrality and the criticality of the Indian Maritime Foundation needs to be appreciated by all of us. We've made much talk about coastal cleanup, whether they are on the beach or they are related to rivers. I want to tell you that unless we are able to generate a full system, this is going to be an exercise in futility. We will clean up the beach. We will put all that kachara into wonderful bags. The media will come. We'll wear those wonderful shirts. We'll get our photographs taken. Our parents will say, ooh and ah. And our friends will say, good job, Joe. And then where will all those bags go? And if you take a place like Erimala, where they don't have a municipal corporation, the panchayat has no idea what to do with it. So when nobody is looking, they pitch it back into the backwater, and it winds up back into the sea. And then we have a full-fledged job all over again. We need a system. We need a full-fledged system. And I'm very happy to say that the Indian Maritime Foundation is embarked on just such a system. That's why it needs support. That's why it merits support. That's why. So the problem otherwise, which has been lamented a great deal, is that we're not able to create and disseminate the romance of the sea, the romance of the maritime domain. Our lessons, our teachers who teach these lessons are, to put it pretty bluntly, they're really boring. I often say that there's no boring history. There are only boring historians. There's no lousy mathematics. There are just crap mathematics teachers. There is no horrendous physics. There are just very poor physics teachers. We know the names of all our heroes. Yes, those ones who enabled us to regain our freedom, जिन्होंने अपनी जान पे जान लगा दी बाजी पे के. We know all of their names, don't we know them? We know them. Shivaji Maharaj, we know Kanoji Angre, we know Rani Lakshmi Bai, we know Mangal Pandey, we know Bhagat Singh, we know Chandrasekhar Azad, we know Lokmanya Tilak, we know Lala Lajpat Rai, we know Mahatma Gandhi, we know Sardar Patel, Subhash Chandra Bose. How do we know them? हमें पढ़ाया गया. Our teachers taught us. Our friends told us. We sang songs about them. We listened to poetry about them. We had all of that. And did anybody tell us how did we lose our freedom in the first place? The one for which all these people had to sacrifice life, limb, property to regain. How did we lose that? Anybody told us that? In 1509, 120 odd years before the British even arrived, there was a battle. It was the Battle of Dew. We fought. How many ships did we have? A quad? Yeah, we had a quad. A quad? Yeah, we had a quad. We had the Zamarin of Calicut. We had the Sultan of Gujarat. We had the Doge of Venice. We had the Mamluks of Egypt. We had 123 ships. The Portuguese came with 22, and we lost. How did we lose? Were we not brave? Of course, we were brave. Did we not understand? Did we not have big rivers in which we fought? Yeah, we did. Then we brought our riverine strategy and tried to put it out to sea. We had the world's best kho-kho team or the best kabaddi team. Hum log aate hain na pat ko marte hue ke hut tu, and when he came, they said, sorry, ye to pratiyogita basketball ki hai. We said, basketball, but we've got a kabaddi team. They said, tough luck. In 1510, we lost Goa in a single day. When we lost these two, we lost control over the littoral. When we lost control over the offshore coast, we lost control over the ability to stop people from coming in. How do you think otherwise Robert Clive came in, ladies and gentlemen? Do you think he just said, beam me up, Scotty, and arrived on the battlefield of Plassey? No, that didn't happen in that way. So, what is our problem in this? Our problem is not that we have lousy, boring history. So what I want to tell everybody in this history business is this. Abhyas mat sikhao yaar, kahani sunao. Kahaniyan sunao. Bring it to life. When I was in school, we had to stand on tables and we had those foot rulers or whatever they're called now, scales, wooden scales. And we were Robert the Bruce and we were Alaric the Goth and we were Attila the Hun. We had all the wrong guys. But our history was alive. It wasn't some textbook with four paragraphs slashed through and then 3 paragraphs completely unrelated. Say, ye padh lena, ye exam mein aane wala hai. That is not how you build maritimity. So then how do you build it? You build it as Commodore Kesnur said, by not converting to the choir, not preaching to the choir, but going and doing outreach. So does the National Maritime Foundation do this? Yeah. How many interns do we get? Last year we ran an internship program for a period of 6 months, ranging from 6 weeks to 6 months. We had 118 final interns. How much did we charge them? Duk, free. This is what the Indian Maritime Foundation does in Pune. This is what I hope all of us will do in future. I've long been an admirer of Commander Mohan Narayan, and I think he typifies the image of this World War II or World War I infantry captain. You know, he's charging out of the trenches. He's got his pistol in his hand, and he finally says, "All right, charge!" And then he looks behind, and there's nobody behind him. Just him. We can no longer afford this. We could never afford this. Now, in any case, we can't afford this. So we need to be able to stand up behind him. Was I not fascinated by the perspectives I heard today? What about this business of museums, of which so much was spoken, and so brilliantly at that? I went to the museum at Acre, Akko in Israel. Where you have the Hospitalia fortress, you have treasures in the wall. What is the difference between that and what we do? It is, okay, baby, touch it, feel it. It doesn't matter. Kids will sit on it. They will play horsey on some really venerable statue. The hell with it. It is coming to life. We had technology. If you go there, you will see that as you pass, you will not only see artifacts, you will see dioramas. Dioramas are where as you change, the colors change, the perspective change. Are we not the software capital of the world? We are? Then where is it? Or are we just the software coolie capital of the world? In which case, we better put that baggage down and start to work like hell. So why are we then otherwise studying history? Because if we don't can't specialize and we can't Work retrodiction. Retrodiction is required if you want to do prediction. In other words, you find something, some pattern which happened a long time ago, it repeated itself, it produced a result, you can see the result a long time ago. Then you say the pattern is going to repeat itself now, and therefore we should see the same result in the future. Retrodiction leads to prediction. Don't do retrodiction. My advice is hire a chap with a tota and those cards. That's the future you will then be able to predict. We have monuments. We talked a great deal about monuments. We spoke with admiring terms about the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. What are we talking about? Maintenance. Are we good at capital expenditure? Brilliant. Are we good at the day-to-day maintenance? No. Do we think that that makes it elitist? Yes. Does it make it elitist? No. Does it mean that simply because our poor people cannot afford some fancy place that we should close Appu Ghar? Of course not. Does it then mean that Appu Ghar mein jo rides hain wo kaam nahi karni chahiye? Equally, of course not. So I found myself having strong resonance with the comments of, say, Dr. Rukshana Nanji. Not too long ago at the INA, when in the Delhi seminar organized there in this 2021 edition, I was privileged to be on the same panel as she was. I was the moderator then. And I'm very happy. I emphasized the criticality of romance. And I was very happy that we are now all singing from the same sheet of music. So by the time we reached session 3 today, I was completely sold on this. And I said to my chaps, I said, let's listen to this. Yeah, this is how to run a seminar. And the one which captured our imagination is the one which you all know. And that's looking into the future, where we found not only brilliant steering of the session by Meera Bhadre, who was brilliant throughout, and who continues to do the SNDT University and herself proud, and is also going to be another port of call for the NMF as soon as this is over. This was a fascinating journey with such diverse champions, not old champions, not young champions, not fat champions, not thin champions, not tall champions, not short, just champions. So Advait Prasant Menon is not great because he was young. That's not what he's great about. He's great because he's great. It didn't matter whether he was 12, 21, or 121. He'd still be great. Surgeon Lieutenant Commander Swati and her passion for passion. Wow. Passion for skydiving, passion for the army, passion for the navy, passion for yachting, passion for skydiving, passion now for mountaineering. That's passion for passion. What about Tia Chatterjee? She fascinated us. How many people learn a ancillary core skill like scuba diving? I took part, the National Maritime Foundation took part in a seminar not very long ago on India's underwater cultural heritage, organized by UNESCO. Do you know what the definition for a cultural heritage site is in India by UNESCO? It must be 100 years ago. It must be 100 years old. Are 100 years? Everything in India is 100 years, even I. So all of us are artifacts. And yet, our endpoints are nearly zero because our serious research is been poor. And therefore, when we see Tia Chatterjee and we see her commitment and we see the fact that she's managed to write a book on underwater archaeology in India and the lost enigma, I think she deserves protracted applause. Is there only that way to enter the maritime domain? No. What about art? Do you know how hard it is to paint the sea? How many paintings have you not seen of an idiotic ship with the wrong wind, the wrong sails set, but wo chale ja raha hai somewhere or the other? And yet we have artists, as we've seen today. And aren't they deserving of praise? Yes. Aren't they deserving of emulation? Yes. Do they spread maritimity? Yes. And when we do talk about maritimity, you know, the one part which really didn't sit well with me was this business of media only publishes bad news. Yeah? Let me give you a question, ladies and gentlemen. India wins the Olympic gold medal in hockey, in field hockey. The next day, do more newspapers get sold or do less newspapers get sold? India produces PV Sindhu wins the world championship. Do we sell more newspapers or do we sell less newspapers the next morning? So anybody who tells you that only bad news sells is merely lazy. Bad news doesn't need a journalist, but good news needs a journalist. And therefore, if you wish to call yourself a leading cutting edge documentary filmmaker, a journalist, a multimedia specialist, let's see some proof. Let's see some proof. Because around the world, I once saw a BBC film on a kabaddi match. This guy fell. He took about 2.5 seconds to fall, slow motion. The bead of sweat from his brow came slowly towards the ground. Just before the bead of sweat hit, his hand hit and the dirt in tiny, slow motion specks. My kid said, "What is this game? I want to play." Anything. Commodore Kesnur correctly said, shooting, golf, anything can become a spectator sport. You need the interlocutor. Once again, there is no boring or non-viewer interesting sport. There are just lousy journalists of that particular sport. So let's become good. Let's make first-class movies. How many of you saw the movie involving pirates? How many people in India now are talking about, when we say the word pirate, what is the word association? Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp. Okay, Johnny Depp. Any chance of producing Johnny Depp? Was Johnny Depp only about Johnny Depp? Was the Pirates of the Caribbean not about ships? Did you not see massive seas, high problems, pirates, good guys, all of that? Where is our stuff? Is all our stuff related to how many warships are made available to you by the Ministry of Defense? That's the limit of our imagination. Then we deserve to be where we are. Finally, I want to say and end my address to you. It's really an exhortation more than an address. I think that this was a fabulous webinar. I think that this is the kind of webinar which involves young people, old people, experienced people, novices, greenhorns, the whole gamut. It involves India. It tries. Its biggest merit and the biggest credit that I can give to the 3 organizations involved in producing such a fantastic day is this. They are attempting, ladies and gentlemen, to provide quality in quantity. Let us be both those things. Let us be part of the quality and let us multiply that quality in quantity so that we don't have needles of excellence upon which we are seeking to balance the mass of India, but we have a mass of excellence upon which we are balancing the mass of India. I think I'd better stop. I think I've run out of time. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, and my congratulations once again to the organizers and my gratitude to them for giving me the chance. Thank you. I'm sorry, I know I was supposed to have a detailed script and read out with some amount of gravitas, but I'm not good for that.
Sir, I can assure you held them all spellbound.
That's absolutely true. Thank you so much, Admiral Chauhan. I'm so glad that finally we get to hear you. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Maritime Seminar 2021 draws to a close, it is my privilege to propose the vote of thanks. At the outset, I would like to thank the Headquarters, Western Naval Command, Indian Maritime Foundation, and the Nautical Institute India West for conceptualizing the conduct of this webinar. On behalf of the organizers, supporting crew, and our online audience, I would like to thank our esteemed dignitaries, Admiral R. Harikumar, Captain Dikshit, Captain Behel, Admiral Pradeep Chauhan for their address and important comments during the course of this webinar. I extend our sincere gratitude to all our distinguished speakers and moderators for sparing their valuable time and sharing with us their perspective and opinions. I would also like to thank the audience, or should I say netizens, for their participation and sharp questions. I would like to place on record our gratitude to all those who worked behind the scenes, to be precise, Team MWC, to make this event possible and for coordinating the event flawlessly. Finally, we thank you all, our viewers, for being with us today. It has been a great pleasure. I leave you on this pensive thought by Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism. Water is the softest thing, yet it can penetrate mountains and earth. This shows clearly the principle of softness overcoming hardness. Jai Hind, Shamno Varuna.